I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'll ask us to remain standing, please. And I will ask Mr. Hatfield to indicate who passed, part of our Board of Ed family or community. Mr. Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd like to ask that we pause for a moment of silence for Mr. Peter Claridis, who passed recently at the age of 88. Mr. Claridis was the husband of Theodore Claridis, as well as the father of our former athletic trainer, Nicole Claridis Petria. Was a longtime benefactor for Seymour Athletics, helping to support the Wildcat Kickoff Club in a multitude of ways, as well as our state championship team, softball teams in many ways. And he was a tremendous supporter of Seymour, the community, but also Seymour Athletics. I know that we share in the loss of Mr. Claridis, along with his other daughter, Representative Themis Claridis, his son-in-law, Stephen Detria, and his grandson, a former Wildcat, Cade Claridis Detria. So I'd like to pause for that moment of silence, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we will go to public comment next. Derek, do you have public comment?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you can begin.
Okay. Elizabeth White, 49 Sycamore Drive. As a member of the reopening committee, I just wanted to take the opportunity to have my voice heard now. Due to the size of the committee, it became a one-sided conversation where the loudest voice was heard. I would like to set the record straight and inform the board that not one person on the committee or in the public that I have spoken to have a problem with the teachers in the district. In fact, they have overcome the largest hurdles in learning curve. They have been asked to adopt the most difficult model of instruction, trying to teach, gauge, and provide feedback for both virtual learners and in-person learners. They have done a masterful job working morning, noon, and night to accomplish this. Only accolades for the teachers. What many people have a problem with is the lack of transparency by the superintendent. He has the power to make all of these decisions. If he consults his health experts and deems a decision necessary, then he should make the decision. What people are tired of is the perceived notion that he is taking the parents into consideration. What is the point of a reopening committee if only some people are heard and others are forced to silently go along with decisions? What is the point of a survey if the decisions are already made and then we just hear about how great things are going? Students and families are struggling. The majority of parents work full-time and cannot be home with their young children to teach them 3 days a week, the other 4 to 5 hours a day that are not online with their teachers at school. I can speak for only my family when I say that the options for my 7-year-old are daycare, exposing him to an entire other cohort of germs, or learning with my 75-year-old mother who has several predisposed health factors. It is not my choice to work, Mr. Wilson. If I could be home with my kids every day, I would, but I can't. We are struggling, and when we are listening at BOE meetings to how well things are going, it is frustrating. When I receive progress reports from the teachers that have more than one data point indicating that my son is not close to where he needs to be, it is frustrating to hear you make broad statements about how NWEA is close to where it was last year. It is the youngest in our schools, not just the kids on IEPs or 504s, that will suffer the consequences of your decisions for years to come. Please hear this loud and clear. We are not okay. Number 2, Christian White, 49 Sycamore Drive. The people in this community need to speak up and have their voices heard. It is unacceptable that the community survey and reopening committee meeting October 14th did not occur sooner. And now that numbers are on the rise Any hope of full return in the near future is highly unlikely based on what Mr. Wilson has stated. Many of us have emailed the superintendent expressing the desire to reopen our schools, but our words are falling on deaf ears. Many school districts across the state, including the Naugatuck Valley, have implemented a full reopening of schools despite rising COVID numbers and even positive reported cases. Safely reopening our schools is indeed possible despite the COVID pandemic, because the hybrid model is what we are forced to accept at the present time. I urge everyone in this great community to demand transparency from the superintendent and administration regarding student growth. Understandably, the circumstances of last spring have left us with little to no data regarding our children's progress. This fall, the elementary and middle schools have collected NWEA data, but this is only one data point and is not enough to gauge whether or not our students are growing academically. Having not been presented with this data, I question how much growth has occurred from last fall until now. What other data points are being used? And more importantly, how is this data guiding instruction and intervention while our kids are learning from home on computers? What is being done to ensure the curriculum and learning gaps that have been created are being filled? We cannot accept general statements indicating that things are going well and that our kids are learning. This is not enough, and we must understand the specifics. Please make no mistake, the repercussions of being complacent right now will be disastrous for our children for years to come, if not longer for the students in the primary grades. Christopher Farrell. There should be a choice full-time school for those who are healthy and at home learning for those who are comprised. That's it. This hybrid model makes no sense. I work in 2 Connecticut hospitals. I don't go to work half the time. I go every day, take precautions, and I don't get COVID, and I work hands-on with actual COVID patients. Kids need to be in school. Stop making decisions based on fear. Please, you're only hurting children in the long term. And finally, from Matthew Christiani, to the respected members of the Seymour Board of Education. Thank you very much for your continued dedication to our children, teachers, administrators, and accompanying staff. In order to comply with the 300 or less word limit, I have left out content that is relevant to the questions below. A growing number of concerned, yet silent parents and extended family members are expressly having these discussions in private and public circles in the backyards, local sporting events, and now social media. The voices are unavoidably looking to you for answers. As taxpayers, I believe that we are entitled to a comprehensive detail of your process of determination in all aspects, especially when those decisions are contended. Lately, many feel that the board's request for public question and concern appeared disingenuous in nature, specifically when it is felt or known that there is little to nothing that will come of it. Perhaps answering some of the following questions in the name of transparency may help to quell rising tensions and concerns within the community. 1. What is the detailed process by which you have arrived at the decision for remaining in and extending the hybrid plan? Is there a specific metric, guide, or scale of infection rates relative to our surrounding towns that you are using to remain in or justify the hybrid model? And can you provide us with the specific data? 2. Have you discussed the possibility to have students with an IEP attend their respective school during the 4 live learning days? 3. Does the board acknowledge the imbalance between our community and the outlying communities and how this relates to our causation and severe financial, physical, emotional strain and the impact this plan is having on some families who are focused to work and who either do not have help from family, whom are elderly and are at increased risk? Thank you very much for your time and continued efforts. Sincerely, Matthew Christiani. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Moving on.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering if it was possible, can we go out of order possibly to ensure that, I'm not sure if Mrs. Federowicz was invited to the meeting, but I don't see her present. So can we possibly go out of order to reopening committee and then work to either send her the invitation or, in case she's having technical difficulties, maybe somebody could reach out to her?
She's joining now. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the waiting room when I was reading the public comment.
Oh, that's okay. So Mr. Martin, Mrs. Federotes is joining us?
Yes.
Okay, so then Jamie, move out of order then.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, fall sports. Mr. Wilson, are you prepared to start and then have Mr. DeStacy report?
I'm actually prepared. Thank you, Mr. Strello. I'm actually prepared to turn it over to Mr. DeStacy, the athletic director, to address fall sports and where we are. And then I know him and Mrs. Federotes, I think, might be prepared to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, very good. Okay, Mr. DeStacy.
Thank you, Mr. Stramello. Just a brief overview of the fall season. I always like to inform the board of what numbers look like in terms of students participating in athletics. So for the fall, we have boys soccer, we have 31 participants, girls soccer, 27, volleyball, 16, swimming, 17. Cross country, we have 18 male athletes and 8 females. And football, despite the how could I say it? Despite the uncertain nature of their season, on average, we have between 50 and 60 participants on a weekly basis. So that's how we're looking in terms of numbers of participants. And I'm happy to report that on the success level, we're doing very well this fall. Volleyball is undefeated. Swimming is undefeated. Boys soccer is undefeated. Girls soccer was 3-3 going into tonight, going into their matchup against Naugatuck tonight. And our cross country teams are both 1-1. So from a success standpoint, we're doing very well. A few things that I would like to touch base with the board about. This fall season, as you know, has been challenging on multiple levels. One of the key contributors to the success of a home opening season has been our custodial crew. These guys are in, and I know Mr. Connors might be on the call. His crew has been in for many hours during the course of their work week. And they have done an incredible job of doing their daily work on top of the fact that they are setting up our facilities and cleaning up our facilities to make sure that home athletics were possible. We've also had a limited capacity crowd. So one of the things that we have done is ensured that all of our home events have been streamed through a YouTube channel, thanks to our technology department. They set up a YouTube station for us, and we have forwarded the links out to our parent base. And every home game has been streamed live so that if parents were able to attend in our limited capacity crowd or were not able to attend as a result of the limited capacity, that they're still able to see our teams compete live. This fall season has been far from the ideal. It has been challenging on multiple fronts, but as an athletic department, we have done our best to keep everyone informed of what's going on. We've done our best to make sure that our fan base can watch our teams compete. And despite the circumstances, we continue to be winning teams in each of our respective sporting areas. So with that being said, I'll be happy to entertain any questions from the board. And I also left out the fact that cheer and dance, despite the fact that they are not formally a fall sport, we invited them in to be part of the soccer season in the fall season, just in case that there isn't a winter season, which we don't know yet, just in case there isn't a fall season, we did not want to deprive those two teams of an opportunity to do what they do and be passionate about. So with that being said, I will entertain any questions from the board.
Okay, before we do that, I would ask Mrs. Fedorowicz if she would like to add anything to Mr. DeStacy's summary of the fall sports. Mrs. Fedorowicz. Okay. Did, Derek, are you sure Mrs. Fedorowicz is there?
I believe
Mr.
I
Schmello,
did allow her in to the meeting.
Okay, does she need to unmute herself?
Kathy Fedorowicz is in the meeting. She is not muted. Her camera is off.
Mr. Schmello,
Yes, Mr.
if I
DeStacy.
may, if Mrs. Fedorowicz is not able to,
I see her now.
there she is. Hey, Kath.
Okay. For some reason, we can't hear you, Kathy.
So, Mr. Schmello, while we're working that out, I have a few other things to contribute, actually.
Okay,
I
go
think it's
ahead.
important for the
Go
board
ahead.
to know. We, as an athletic department, came up with a very structured plan to allow fans to our outdoor events. We put specific guidelines in place, and I'm happy to report that our parent base has been extremely receptive and supportive of the guidelines that have been put in place so that they can come and watch their children play or their kids play or their family members play. One of the biggest obstacles we've had to overcome this fall is the availability of buses. We have no buses available on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays until 4:30 p.m.
Wow.
So in certain cases, we've had to do a 1:30 dismissal for some of our teams to get them to a game just to ensure that they were able to compete. Our fan policy, NVL wide, visiting fans are not being allowed into events. And I will tell you that the first couple of fall events that we had some troubles at Seymour High School. But we have the support of the Seymour Police Department and our school security officers, and we're able to enforce the fact that visiting fans are not allowed at sporting events at Seymour High School. And that was a league-wide decision that was made. As the fall season progressed, we developed a plan to have 2 spectators for outdoor events. And we developed a contact tracing system where the fans could sign up for games. And that has worked out very well to date. And I'm happy to report that as of last week, we met with our advisory group, and we're looking at the possibility of allowing a limited capacity at indoor events for the remainder of the fall season, specifically for senior parents and the families of senior competitors for swimming and volleyball, to make sure that they have a chance to see their kids compete in their senior year. Senior night is also a very important component of our student athletes' careers. We have already had our boys' senior night, which went off very successfully for soccer. And we're looking ahead to volleyball, swimming, and girls soccer on how we can accommodate families for their senior nights. So despite the uncertain nature of the fall season that the COVID pandemic has caused, we have done everything as an athletic department to make sure that our kids are competing, their families can watch them compete, and they have a successful outcome in the end.
Okay. That, I noticed all kind of yellow around Kathy when all that noise was going on. So I don't know what that means. Can you speak now and we can hear you maybe? No, it's not coming across, Kath. Derek, can you work on that?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
chatting with you.
Nothing now?
Oh, yes, definitely. Go ahead, Kathy.
I was going to say, my husband's going to be thrilled because finally somebody figured out a way to mute me. But as Ernie said, this year has definitely been challenging. And again, one of the biggest ones is the bus issue. I know for us, we've had to leave early some days, and it's the last thing you want to do, but it's the only way to get the kids to an event, especially our soccer teams or cross country that they're playing in areas that don't have lights. So we try to get them there and then get them home. It's just, there's been a lot going on. It's not, from a coaching standpoint, I was excited that we were going to have a season, but at the same time, it's, you know, it's definitely not a typical season, and the kids know it. They're forced to kind of just play the 4 or 5 teams in our area. It's definitely not the same, but they're making the best of it.
Okay. All right. I will ask for questions from board members for either Mr. DeSacy or
Mr. Stramello?
Yes.
If I could add one other thing too.
Go ahead.
But before we get into the question and answer period.
Go ahead.
We talked about the actual in-season fall sports. I want to also touch on the concept of 7 versus 7 football before we get into the question period.
Okay.
The 7-on-7 football, while it is coming up, as a matter of fact, our kids were competing tonight as a rain out from this past Friday. The 7-on-7 football is not an in-season event right now. It's not considered part of a formal football season. And Kathy and I have advocated for football from the beginning. But the problem is that there were a lot of different roadblocks that came into play in order to get 7-on-7 football to happen. First of all, this has nothing to do with any of the limitations put forth by the COVID pandemic. As Kathy mentioned in previously, yes, we are in the NVL, but we have been subdivided into regional clusters, which was part of the email that I had sent out to the board last week when I provided an update on 7-on-7 football. We have 6 teams in our cluster, us being one of the 6. The others are Ansonia, Derby, Emmett O'Brien, Oxford, and Woodland. And going into this fall season, the only one of those schools that was offering 7-on-7 football at the onset was Derby. So we immediately set up a home and home versus Derby. Understanding that the teams in our cluster were not participating in 7-on-7 football led us to reach out to Naugatuck, which is part of the NVL under normal circumstances in our division. But Naugatuck is not part of our regional cluster. But since they're under the guidance of the same health district as we are, the Naugatuck Valley Health District, we added them to our 7 versus 7 football schedule. Now, in full disclosure and full transparency, we had some late information obtained yesterday that Derby, their 7-on-7 football team, is only comprised of underclassmen. They're not a varsity squad. So now that puts our home and home against Derby in jeopardy. Again, full disclosure. So with that being said, we have to explore some other options. But when it comes to the 7 versus 7 football, the main thing that worked against us is that the teams in our cluster were not offering that same program. So we could not immediately schedule with them. We reached out to Naugatuck and they were happy to oblige and grant us a game. We played against them tonight, but we are also looking to add a home event with them in the future. But for right now, we're in a holding pattern because none of our cluster is offering 7 versus 7 football. We'd have to reach outside of that cluster to obtain any additional games. The CIAC is also working to have a season later this year, as everyone knows, but we can't speak to the definite nature of that. But for right now, that's the best that we can offer in terms of 7-on-7 football.
Okay, now I'll open up the questions. Okay, Mrs. Harmeling.
So with respect to 7-on-7 football, Naugatuck is actually in our region for football. The regions are different based on each individual sport. And for sure, we have 6 teams, like you mentioned, but Emmett O'Brien is not in our football cluster. Naugatuck is. So it's great that we're playing Naugatuck tonight. Derby isn't going to have a varsity team because they have students playing on the independent team, which is also why Woodlands is not doing a team. So my question for the 2 athletic directors is, if 7-on-7 football is not even an official CIAC season, why is it that we have to pay attention to or be bound by these seemingly arbitrary regions that the CIAC has put together, where we have 6 in our cluster and there are some clusters that have 11 and 10 teams in it? So they've really limited us, but I'm not understanding why we have to listen to the CIAC if we're not playing a CIAC sport. And I absolutely believe that we can't be just playing anybody we want, but to not allow reaching out and playing Newtown, Monroe, Shelton, any town that has numbers that are as good or better than ours in terms of COVID health metrics, to me should be fair game. This is a group of, like we said, 50 to 60 kids. It's the largest sport we have, perhaps outside of running or long distance track, but I actually don't even think cross country had that many students. And I just feel like we haven't been as creative as we can be. So I'd like to hear you speak to that disconnect between, it's not a CIAC event, but yet we're following CIAC subcategories, which have completely eliminated our ability to compete.
I could definitely speak to that, Ms. Harmeling.
No sound, Ernie. There's no sound.
Nope, still no sound.
Definitely not muted.
Okay, there you are.
No, you have the wrong number.
Can you hear me
Can you
okay
hear me
now?
Yep.
Okay. We had conversations with a couple schools outside of our regional grouping, one of which was Holy Cross, one of which was Watertown. With Holy Cross, a common date was not in the works at the time. Because at that point, we were under the impression that only 1 game per week was allowed, similar to a regular season. But there is some leeway to schedule additional opponents. The problem that we had when we reached out to Watertown and to some of the other surrounding schools was they were in a similar situation to us. They were hesitant to reach outside of the cluster for the same reasons that we were. We're under a certain health bureau. They're under different health bureaus, and they were hesitant to go outside of their respective regions.
Okay, let me see if anybody else has a question first, Kristen. Anybody else have a question for Mr. DeSacy before I go back to Mrs. Harmeling? I'll ask one more time. Do any other board members have a question for Mr. DeSacy?
I have a question, but not regarding 7-on-7, so I could hold it if that's okay.
Yeah, you could hold it, yeah. Kristen Bruno, did I see you raise your hand?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I just want to thank everyone involved as the parent of an athlete for making this season happen. I think it is something that kids look forward to and enjoy. Those two fan passes are hotly contested among my family members. And I just thinking about our football players and their parents, I know I was able to attend one home game, and it was Friday night under the lights on DeBarber Field, and the joy that I felt finally being able to watch my daughter participate was sort of dampened by knowing that my friends who are parents of football players and their children are really missing out. So I appreciate all the efforts to try to make something happen for all of our athletes in Seymour.
Okay, thank you. Any other board member before I go back to Mrs. Harmling? One more time, any other board member? Okay, Kristen Harmling.
Yeah. So I'm curious to understand why it is that, and this is going to be a conversation I think that we continue to talk about when we talk about the reopening plan. You know, the governor has given us a solid red, yellow, orange, whatever the colors are. The metrics are solid. So it is frustrating to me personally, and it's clearly frustrating to community members that we don't just abide by those rules. So if we're in yellow and another health district is in yellow, there shouldn't be a problem. Because I'm not talking about spaces inside of school buildings. I'm not talking about social distancing. We're talking about sports. And you know, even with the spectator issue, why don't we all just follow the governor's rules for private events, indoor versus outdoor? An outdoor event, you can have 150 people at an outdoor event, socially distanced with masks. So while great, we've got 2 passes, and I hear what you're saying, that the whole NVL, but I feel like we are putting up hoops that we then require ourselves to jump through. And if we could talk to the rest of the league and talk to the CIAC, we have metrics in place. We all have the same metrics, not the same numbers, but the same ways of developing numbers. It's the same coding scheme. If a school is in yellow, I don't know why it should be difficult to do. It's just very, very frustrating to have numbers and guidance from the state, but yet everything, it seems to be up to individual health districts, even if the numbers are actually the same from one to the next. So it's just, there is a group of students, and admittedly a group of parents, of which I am one, that really feels like they have been on the losing end of the stick since August, if not earlier. And I really encourage you guys to just reach out. And if a school is in a district, a health district that's yellow and we're yellow, let's play. I mean, let's play. I also wish that we had known that there was a bus problem happening, because maybe we could have put our heads together to find ways around that. Not all schools even provide busing to sporting events, and maybe that would have been an option for some sports, for some students. I don't know if that would have been more helpful than not, but you know, it's one of those things that if we had known, perhaps we could have put our heads together. The last thing I would like to ask about is, my understanding is we don't have a formal policy on allowing students to use school equipment for activities that you do outside of school, but it's certainly been done in the past. So I would actually like to make a motion to ask the Seymour School District to make available equipment, available for use by students who are participating in activities that Seymour Schools does not offer. So that's a motion I would like to put out on the table.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go to our parliamentarian to ask if we can do that, since this is a special meeting. Mr. Stanek?
It's under the discussion of sports.
I understand. I'm asking Mr. Stanek as our parliamentarian.
Mr. Stramello, I don't.
Okay, you started, Mr. Stanek, and stopped.
Mr. Chairperson, if you would please read the agenda item that we are discussing at this time.
Okay, we are discussing A, fall sports. And it comes under discussion and possible action.
Well, that's a pretty broad category. You do have possible action.
Okay,
I would have liked to have seen the category much more specific. However, if you're asking me for an FOI ruling, I believe that under FOI, the motion would be appropriate. However, it's not, I think the motion would be appropriate.
okay.
And I'm happy to
Alrighty.
restate that motion more succinctly.
Sure.
Yep. I'd like to make a motion that Seymour schools allow the use of available school equipment for activities that are currently not being offered by Seymour schools, and to formalize this intent in a policy.
Okay.
I'll second that motion for discussion purposes.
Who was that, Chris?
Peter.
Oh,
sorry,
no, that was Peter. Okay.
I'm
Kristen,
sorry.
could you just repeat that again, Kristen? There was one part that I'm unclear on. If you
Sure. I'll actually, I will remove the last part. So I'm going to, I believe it's rescind my motion or alter my motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that Seymour schools allow the use of available school equipment for activities that are currently not being offered by Seymour schools.
Okay, for activities that are not being offered by Seymour schools. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I'll second
Peter, you
the
second that?
amendment. Yes, I'll second that.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Is there a discussion from board members?
Through the chair,
Yes.
I know that this question was asked and it was rejected by the administration. So I gotta believe that there was probably some good reasoning behind that. So I'd like to hear from them as to what the reasoning was behind rejection.
Okay. Mr. Wilson, you want to take that first?
Certainly, I could try. When any type of equipment that is the property of Seymour schools, whether it be sporting equipment and or computers, if someone wanted to join an outside computer club, would we then be able to provide them with, a certain laptop or a desktop or a printer or even a 3D printer or anything like that? So it begs the question of what equipment, all equipment, certain equipment, sporting equipment. The issue, to clarify, Peter, and I appreciate the question, the reason the sporting equipment, when Mr. DeStasi, Mrs. Fedorowicz, myself, Mrs. Tenza, when we first heard of that request, we actually talked about it amongst ourselves. Then I also called the board's attorney to get their input on it. And the board's attorney stated that this would not be a prudent decision because of liability purposes. So while even if someone were to write a waiver or to sign a waiver, if you will, the potential for if the child borrowing our equipment were to get injured using our equipment, there would still be a potential for a lawsuit and therefore liability brought upon the district, therefore brought upon the Seymour Public Schools and the Board of Education if that were a policy that would be instituted. So that's the background information, and that's why the decision not to lend out equipment was made to not obviously lend out equipment. And I believe, obviously, predating myself, predating Mr. DeStasi and Mrs. Fedorowicz in their current roles, but certainly Mrs. Fedorowicz as a coach and Mr. DeStasi with longevity in the district. I don't believe that was ever done in any years past when we had that initial conversation. So that's the reason the decision was made. That's the reason our position was what it was. It was really for protection of the district against liability claims.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Garfalo.
I'm not quite clear on this issue of liability. I think I would need a little bit more information, to wit, when, for example, I'll use football because I believe of any of the sports, they rely heavily on the use of school-provided equipment, which is board purchased, etc. So when a child, a student, is involved in the district football team and uses equipment, provided by us, how does a liability issue differ from one of our students borrowing similar equipment from the district, but using it in a different venue? How does that liability shift?
Certainly, one would be a school sanctioned event, whether it be a CIAC sanctioned event, a sporting event, football, to use your analogy, and the others would not. So anything not sanctioned by the school, not governed by the school, not governed by the CIAC or any body, then liability would come into play if the person were to utilize that equipment for whatever means and then potentially get injured. So that's the liability. They're protected under our insurance policy when it's a school sanctioned event, and they are not protected under our insurance policy when it is not.
Okay. So it really relates to the language as expressed in the insurance policy that covers our district.
Yes, that would be correct, sir.
All right.
Okay, any other discussion?
Yeah.
Yes, Mrs. Armling.
I, with all due respect, I think that any request anybody ever makes in this world could be tracked back to an issue of liability. Anybody could sue anybody for anything. And I think Mr. Garfalo's point is the one that logic rules. And to the best of my knowledge, we absolutely have allowed football players to use our equipment when they have done summer camps that are not within our district. So again, to the best of my knowledge, that has occurred. So I think that we have to balance when we have an opportunity to say yes, especially when we have been forced to say no over and over again to families, that we should strive to look for the yes. We will always be able to find a reason to say no to everything, always. So when we feel like this would be a pretty easy yes with a pretty low risk, because again, this is football equipment that they would have been using on our fields if we were able to offer it. We're not. So the football equipment is going to be used in the same exact way for families that have been paying the same exact taxes, and now we're getting less and less services, as are we all. So I just would have liked to have seen our district say yes, because it wasn't a difficult request, and we're forced to say no so often. So there's a motion on the table, and if there are no other comments, Mr. Stramello.
Okay, I see Mr. Stanik's hand up.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask, are we talking about loaning equipment, football equipment to one of these independent leagues? Is that what we're talking about?
I believe so.
Yeah, 2 Seymour students.
We're talking about loaning equipment to an independent league that's conducting an activity that's not sanctioned by the CIAC and the Department of Public Health. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, but
Yes.
if I could, I would rephrase it. We're not loaning it to the independent league. We're loaning it to the students, as are Derby and as is Woodland. So we're not giving it to a league. We're giving it to loaning it. It would be a loan to a student.
But the board would be circumventing the guidance, the directives of the Department of Public Health and the CIAC at this point. Am I not correct?
I would believe so. Mr. Wilson or Mr. DeStacy?
The CIAC outwardly stated that they do not support a school district loaning equipment to players who choose to participate in an independent league.
Okay. All right.
I did not know that. I did not know CIAC had a stance on loaning of equipment.
Okay. Any other board member wishing to comment? Yes, Mrs. Bruno.
Just 2 questions. What are we talking about in terms of equipment?
My understanding, Mrs. Bruno, is that it would be anything that would be required in a normal football setting, the pads, helmet, etc.
So player gear.
Correct.
Okay. And then my other question, are there other districts that have made the decision to lend the equipment? I thought I read Derby, New Britain, Is there any information about that?
Mrs. Bruno, to be perfectly honest with you, I have not researched that per se. I do know that a lot of districts offer a waiver, but when we had at the district level made the decision that we were not going to loan out equipment due to the counsel that we had received from our attorney, at that point, we just, as an athletic department, we did not move forward with the thought of loaning equipment out.
Okay. And any other comments on this? Okay, so we have a motion to approve the use of the equipment, and it was seconded. It was made by Mrs. Harmling, seconded by Mr. Kubik. So I will call a vote. Mrs. Bruno.
I think given the unique situation of the pandemic, I am going to vote yes under limited conditions.
What do you mean by that?
That I may vote differently in another case, but for the one request that's come before us, I vote yes.
Okay, well, I'm not sure. Do we know the exact number? Do we? Mr. DeStacy, do you know?
I'm sorry, Mr. Schmel, I missed that.
Do you know the exact number of students who have requested it?
I believe it's 2.
Okay.
Mr. Shamel, I'm sorry. Can you just reread or ask the board clerk to reread the motion, please, before we vote
Yes.
again?
Okay,
Mrs.
Mrs. Doherty? Mrs. Doherty?
I'm sure she'll be right with that.
I'm sorry, you don't have to get Mrs. Harmling to repeat it. I can't get it.
I can read it if you would like, if that'd be all right, Mrs. Tramello.
Sure.
The motion was that Seymour schools allow the use of available school equipment for activities that are currently not being offered by Seymour schools. And I believe that the use of the word currently, if we want to keep it very, very strict, that would literally mean right now. So what Mrs. Bruno, the spirit of what she is agreeing to, I think falls within that.
Is that all right, Mr. Hatfield?
Yes, I'm sorry. In the previous motion, I thought there was the word policy, but that was.
I did. I amended my motion, Jay, because I realized that takes it down another path for another day.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was on the second path. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so Mrs. Bruno, you're a yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Champagne?
I'll vote yes.
Mr. Garofalo?
In deference to the board's council recommendation, and inasmuch as I am still unclear as to liability issues, I'm going to abstain from the vote.
Okay. Mrs. Harmeling?
Mrs. Harmeling votes yes.
Mr. Hatfield?
Mr. Hatfield votes yes.
Mr. Kubik?
Mr. Kubik will vote yes.
Okay, Mrs. Nesteriak?
Beth Nesteriak, yes.
Mr. Stanek?
Fred Stanek votes no.
And Mr. Strumella votes no also. Motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yes, 1 abstention, 2 noes. Okay, now I would like to caution board members that it's 7:50 and we do have another meeting at 8:30. with our council, and we do know that that costs money. So moving to letter B, winter sports, Mr. DeStacy.
There's not much to report on winter sports. I have not seen a copy of the full agenda for tonight, as I was not in the office today. However, I did forward a link to the board clerk, Ms. Doherty, to possibly add to the agenda for tonight. All we have right now is the list of dates associated with a winter season, assuming that it goes off without a hitch, along with some guideline principles from the CIAC. But right now, if we do have a winter season, the start date for the first practices will be November 21st, which is considerably earlier than in previous years, with the intention of wrapping up the season by February 21st, inclusive of a state tournament for the winter sports.
Okay, Mr. Federal, do you have anything to add to Mr. DeStacy's summary?
No, they just talked about possibly a 16-game schedule for basketball as opposed to a 20, so limiting the play. But the rest of it appeared, as long as looks like we're going to be bound to those regions again, that they'll develop a schedule for just those regional teams and get a 16-game schedule in. And nothing was said about cheer or dance or indoor track at this point.
Okay. I have a question first is, I would assume, and I hate to use that word because we all know what that does, that wrestling is not going to be allowed, which is a winter sport.
Mr. Stramello, we have one wrestler who wrestles as a team of one in Derby.
Right.
Earlier this week, I reached out to the athletic director of Derby just to get the ball rolling with that process. And at which point he informed me that they will not be entertaining teams of one this year.
Okay. And then I would assume again that swimming would follow, the boys swimming would follow the same pattern as girls swimming in the fall. That should be an easy one, I would think. Where some meets are held and then some meets are done virtual, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then the other sport would be indoor track. Okay, and we haven't heard anything on indoor track yet, correct?
Mr. Stramello, indoor track is going to be a little bit of a wild card because of the fact that there's only certain facilities that are capable of
Right.
hosting such events. So a lot of them are public venues as opposed to like on a high school campus. So we're going to wait for further guidance on that. But indoor track is definitely a wild card for this winter.
Okay. All right. Do any other board members have any questions for our athletic
I have
director?
a question through the chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Hatfield.
I think we discussed it. Mrs. Harley mentioned it. Mr. Stacy mentioned about the bus issues. 4:30 games during the winter season, I think just quite frankly aren't acceptable in a lot of cases, in the sense that if you have a freshman game, 3:45, you have a varsity game that starts at 5:30, if you have to travel an hour, etc. I'd like to hear from Mrs. Holmes. What are we doing to work with the bus company, and what kind of responsibility are they taking for this? I would like to have the contract sent to us tomorrow between the bus company and the Board of Education so we could relook at it. But I'd like to hear from Mrs. Holmes as to, one, why this wasn't mentioned to us previously, and two, what is she doing about it? Or excuse me, what is the district? But I think she's the transportation coordinator.
Right now, I'm working with the bus company to see if that can be accommodated. As of right now, we haven't come up with a solution for it. There's still a shortage of bus drivers out there as well. So I will continue to have the conversation and try to resolve the issue between us and the transportation company.
Through the chair, if I could have one quick follow-up. So will there then be a cost benefit to us because they are technically not accommodating? We are accommodating their request and changing our schedules based on them. You know, we pay for that service. So are they going to give us a refund or a reimbursement or some sort of financial settlement going to be worked out?
We don't pay for it up front. We pay for it separately in the contract. I will share a copy of the contract with you.
Okay.
And it will indicate in there how we treat the athletics buses.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks so much.
Okay, any other questions?
Mr. Schmel, if I could just jump in also in regards to the transportation issue. That's not just unique to Seymour. It's anyone that's in our regional cluster. They're all having the same issue and they're all being bound to that same restriction. So we're not alone on that front. The other schools in our regional area that use All-Star are having the same problem.
That's correct. And we were trying to coordinate it with another district, but we weren't able to do so at this time. It's just something that we have to continue to work with the bus company.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong about the busing with athletics. From my past knowledge as AD, is that we usually build into it X number of bus trips, and then if we happen to be in the tournaments, our teams qualify for tournaments, then we have others that sometimes add to the cost, correct? Or is that not the way it's done?
It sometimes adds to the cost, yes.
Okay, all right.
That's costed out separately because we may or may not be in a competition, you know?
Correct. Right. All right.
Just a follow up to that, to Mr. Schmel's point, and I'll look at the contract when I sent it, but the seasons have been shortened. So even if we, you know, for example, volleyball, I believe now was 12 games instead of 20 games. So instead of 10 away, you're only having 6 and 6. So we're still built into it could be 4 more games away that we aren't using the buses for. So again, I would like to read through the contract and see that. But to Mr.
I'll give
Schmel's
you a
point,
copy of the contract.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good point, Mr. Hatfield. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll move to our last item, the reopening committee, and I will ask Mr. Mr. Wilson to start. And again, I will ask us, please, because it's almost 8 o'clock, that we try to limit our discussions and try to be as succinct as possible, even to the point that I may have to cut people off. And I know that's not going to make some people happy, but to keep the meeting moving and to make sure that we get to our second meeting, because we are traveling for a second meeting, I will ask us to please follow my request. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Stramello. I think I will definitely try to be as brief as I can. Thank you for several board members who were able to make the reopening committee meeting last week, where in that meeting, and those of you who were unfortunately unable to make it, to fill you in, the committee was able to hear from 5 professionals, highly respected, one being our director of emergency management, one being our head nurse, one being our district doctor, one being the director of Naugatuck Valley Health District, and the other being the chief of pediatric medicine at Griffin Hospital. So to get 5 medical opinions on where we are and in terms of potential return, 2 of those documents are provided as support documents for the board this evening in terms of the message from Naugatuck Valley Health District, as well as the message from the district doctor. Our head nurse is also on the line, and she'd be more than happy to share her comments that she shared at the reopening, as well as comments shared by the chief of pediatrics, Dr. Wayne. Unfortunately, just today, our metrics are on the rise as they were last week. Unfortunately, over the weekend, we had a number of +5 cases within Seymour and a total number of 32 in the valley, which is actually putting us on the yellow-orange borderline. So a little heightened sense of alert there, but we are still staying the course in the hybrid model, keeping our numbers minimum within our schools, keeping our social distancing, wearing our masks, and doing everything that we can to mitigate as best we can. So while that is still the prudent decision as shared in the letter that was sent out to the community, obviously today's metrics further support that even from last week. But it is something that is concerning and something that we are closely monitoring and watching. I would be remiss if I didn't thank our head nurse, Rebecca Bennett, who obviously is watching the numbers each and every day, working with the Naugatuck Valley Health District, constantly keeping us apprised, as well as my entire administration team also on this call. I thank them for coming out this evening and joining this call. And I know they wanted to be a part just in case there were any questions or comments or anything that they could add, as well as our Director of Facilities, Mr. Tim Connors, who's also on this call. So, you know, everyone is working hard. Our teachers are working very hard. Our administrators are working very hard. We're connecting with our learners, whether they be in person or whether they be remote, and or whether they be temporary full distance, as some have chosen. So we are continually looking at that. Our administrative team meets weekly. We're discussing a lot of things, a lot of ways to see where we are, to help one another, to continue to learn and continue to grow and to continue to get better. Our Director of Pupil Services, Dr. Boyle, has been working with special populations. He's reached out, they've reached out to him, continually having conversations as to if they can come back for an increased number of days when that's applicable. He has not shied away from those phone calls, neither have our building administrators. So while our reopening plan, if you will, is to continue on the course of hybrid learning, once again, it is the prudent decision based on those 5 professionals and their opinions and their support of the metrics as they are right now in terms of keeping our numbers where they are so that we can have our mitigation strategies in place to ensure the health and safety of our students and our staff. So I hope that summarized it. Obviously, I can let Nurse Bennett or anyone from the team also share any comments that the board would wish, but I am trying to realize the board's time this evening as well, Mr. Stramello. But if there are questions that anyone from the team could answer, I would just welcome that they also jump in and answer if that's the case.
Okay, I was going to ask Mrs. Bennett if she wanted to add to that, and then I was going to ask Dr. Boyle to add to that before we go to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stramello.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Bennett?
Stramello. Thank you, Mr. Stramello. Good evening. I just want to clarify again with the metrics, and I know there's that yellow, orange, red, and unfortunately it's not that cut and dry as a state as a whole. It's part of the ADAPT addendum, just like our HVAC is not as cut as dry as every town. Our proximity and social distancing, we've looked into, and I've reached out to many supervisors in districts that have opened in full. And I've often found out that many of them have smaller classrooms. They're utilizing more space. They have outdoor space that we don't have in all our buildings, which again is concerning coming winter coming up, that where we are going to do mass breaks, where we are going to do the social distancing. So those are some of the big concerns. Something else that the health department pointed out to me tonight too, because we are in frequent collaboration, is that out of those plus 32 cases that we had just this weekend, 5 in Seymour, 6 total of those were children under the age of 19 years old. So we are seeing more in the younger generation, which definitely affects our schools community. We're definitely watching that. But the numbers, unfortunately, are on the rise amongst the other factors that go into it.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Bennett. Dr. Boyle, if you would like to give us an update on your communication with the special needs students of our district.
Absolutely, and good evening, everyone. I think that one of the questions that I've heard posed on numerous occasions, both at the reopening committee as well as Mr. Wilson also alluded to this evening, we have been and will continue to be looking at our special ed population to ensure that we're able to meet our students' needs during the hybrid model. We have not shied away and will continue to not shy away if there's a need that arises that requires us to bring students in 4 days a week. You know, we have a limited number of students, but we do have a number of students that are in 4 days a week in each of the 4 buildings. You know, and the building administrators and I have been working together, and I think the building administrators have done a really nice job. We've been assessing the number of hours in a student's individualized education plan, their special ed plan, as well as individual factors for our students, such as their cognitive abilities and their social, emotional, and behavioral functioning, in making the decisions whether or not we need to bring certain students back for 4 days. We continue to make changes to that. We've added a couple more students last week at the high school level to the 4-day-a-week roster, and we'll continue to do so if the need arises. You know, make no mistake, all students would benefit from being in 5 days a week, and we know that. But, you know, we're really looking to try to do best for our students with disabilities right now, so.
Mr. Stramello, could I add one more thing? I apologize. I didn't think of it when I was speaking before. On the CDC website for Connecticut also, when we talk about metrics, I don't know if anybody saw the new map that they put out, which is actually very informative. If you hover over each town, I realized, and they shared with me, Seymour is at 8.7% this past week. So past Thursday, our numbers have increased. So that's why our numbers are going now towards the orange. And the health department is telling me that based on the surge that we're seeing, that they're concerned for the rise. And that's why we're watching that also. But that's on that new map. If you hover over each town, it tells you what the metric is for that individual town. If each town goes to red, it's not based on, then you have to look for your town. I'm backing up.
Okay. All righty. Now, I'm going to ask that we have questions, and please not make statements. So does anybody have questions for our staff? Yes, Mrs. Bruno.
Just, we heard, you know, immediately after the meeting and in public comment tonight, some frustration from parents about their voices not being heard and the structure of the reopening committee meeting. I'm just wondering if Mr. Wilson would speak to that.
I can. You know, at the end of the reopening committee meeting, I welcomed that committee's input on their ideas. The work to make things better, if indeed there is something that needs to be made better in the hybrid approach, is the work of the administrative team, which meets weekly. I can definitely certainly clarify that with the team, with the group, again, the reopening committee, but the reopening committee got to hear firsthand from those 5 professionals, just as I did. You know, the message from Naugatuck Valley Health District came in around 5:27 that afternoon, and the meeting started at 5:30. The Dr. Wayne, I'm grateful that the chief of pediatric medicine joined the call. I had never met the gentleman before, but it was great to hear his insight and have his expertise on the call, as well as, you know, others. So to answer your question, and I hope I'm answering it, Mrs. Bruno, yes, but when their input was asked for at the very end of the tail end of that meeting, so before another survey does go out, which we are going to be sending out, if that group would like to add their input on strategies, suggestions, comments, then I would gladly take that to our administrative team, because that's where the work has to get done and will get done with our administrative team. If indeed there are things that need to continually get better, and we do believe that we are continually working on getting better. But as we said, our teachers are working very hard, our administrators, our staff, they're giving over 100%. To say over 100% is not good enough, I think would be self-deflating. And I don't think that was anyone's message. It certainly was not anyone on our administrative team's message. So we just have to be very, I don't want to say cautious, but careful. I think that we can always improve, as Dr. Boyle said as well. But I think we improve, and we improve as a team. We improve. Our administrative team takes any suggestions that we hear, works on that, and comes up with solutions that we work on with our staff, with our teachers, provided they have the time to implement that through professional development and things of that nature. So I hope that answered your question in terms of, my comment to that committee was to share anything via email personally to me and CC the associate superintendent. That was a heartfelt message for them to do so that if there was feedback, that group would have the ability to do it before the survey went out to everyone in the community.
Okay, is there another question from another board member? Mrs. Harmley.
So the decision that was made at the reopening committee meeting is the decision, and I'm not questioning the decision. I'm asking for insight into the process, because I think I'm speaking for myself and I'm speaking on behalf of many of the comments from the parent portion of the committee, that we were under the impression that the decision would be guided by health metrics, guided by the thoughts of medical professionals, and ultimately be the decision of the committee. Now, I can wax on and on about whether I think it should be a committee's decision to make the call to make that or not, but that's not the point. The point is, if the process is going to be that we are going to wait until all 5 of our medical professionals agree that we should be back in full time, then please announce that that's what the process is. Because that means the process is not looking at the data for the numbers. And again, I'm not talking about what's happened with the numbers this past week. I'm talking about a documented process that says once our numbers are hit this, stay there for 2 weeks, we will go back to school in this fashion. That's what we're all desiring. Instead of feeling like we're coming to the table to make a collaborative decision, and we start off by hearing 5 medical professionals saying, no, don't come back to school, when neighboring towns are looking at the same numbers, making a different decision, that's where the frustration comes in. So if the process is that it's a non-starter, if the 5 people who are involved in our process with the medical hat on, then we shouldn't have a committee until we have the green light from those people.
Okay.
It's a process problem. Yes, the question is if Mr. Wilson could articulate what the process is.
Okay,
again,
thank
if it's
you.
a stop, if it's a stop with medical professionals, that's what should be put out there.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, you have a question?
So the process, obviously, we take into consideration the metrics, the numbers, as Nurse Bennett said, as well as where we are. So in terms of process to bring us back, our numbers would have to be on the decline and get us into those areas where it stays in the decline and stays in a number that's acceptable from that medical health and safety standpoint for students and staff. And once it does, then we can gladly reopen. I would love to say we can reopen K-12 immediately, but our numbers are not dictating that as such. So in terms of process, the process would be when the numbers are on the decline and stay on the decline, at least for a 2-week period, so that we know that the decline is a real decline, not of a decline for a day or 2 days or 3 days. So statistically relevant decline plus the support of those professionals, and then we could actually reopen the doors for all students.
Okay, let me see if somebody else has questions first, Kristen.
That's fine.
Okay. Questions? Yes, Beth.
Go ahead, Beth.
Hi, good evening. Just a question about, there's also been a lot of commentary about while the decision was made, how do we improve the hybrid learning? And I know, Mr. Wilson, you mentioned this administration team weekly meetings. I think it would be enlightening for not only the board, but the community to hear what those topics include and cover in terms of continuous improvement when it comes to the hybrid model. I know Dr. Boyle mentioned some things, but I think we need to increase the transparency of how your team is actually looking at continuous improvement of the hybrid model. I think that would be really helpful. So if we could find a mechanism to report on the actions taken by that weekly meeting and document them and share them publicly, that would be my request, Mr. Chimello.
Okay. Mr. Wilson, do you want to respond to that?
I definitely can certainly speak to the team as well, and I could provide some sort of report that we could put on our COVID page in terms of things that we've discussed and things that we're working on improving. For example, one thing would be our continuous peer-to-peer sharing, where teachers are going in to observe other teachers for best practices. So things of that nature that our administrators have done and have shared at our weekly meetings, we could definitely put that on our COVID page in terms of just weekly updates on best practices of something to that nature, rather than being pointed specific about certain models.
Okay, other questions from other board members? I have one also. Other questions from other board members? I'll let other board members go first.
I don't know if I'm included in the other board members or not, since I've asked a question already.
No, not yet, Mrs. Armling. I will get to you. Any other board members wishing to ask questions? Okay, I have a simple question in my mind. During your meetings, has there been discussions about backpacks and the heaviness of backpacks and stuff like that because of only being there 2 days a week? So you have more supplies versus if you're there 5 days a week where you take less things home. Simple question, I think.
Sure. The conversation has not come up about the backpack loads per se. I think that our teachers, just like we had stated in the original reopening plan, have really done a good job in expressing to the students what they need to bring and what they don't need to bring. And of course, I could say firsthand experience, my daughter as well always overpacks her backpack, even though I tell her to try to pack accordingly. So some students, I think, just necessarily overpack because they're fearful that they may be not packing something, but we have not heard that as a straight concern in terms of the load being carried by students, and that has not come up, Mr. Stramello, but I know that was a concern from a lot in the very beginning, but that hasn't come up. So I think that our teachers are doing a good job really telling the students what it is they need for those certain days at all levels. And obviously the different schedule at the high school, obviously only 4 classes helps the load there as well, as opposed to the 8. So it has not come up. It's something that I'm sure if it comes up, we could definitely brainstorm to make that manageable for students. But thank you for the question.
Okay. One last time before I go to Mrs. Harmling, and I would think that will be our last question because I'm going to ask us to adjourn to provide the opportunity for people to travel. Okay, Mrs. Harmling, and again, for all of us, I thank you, but let's make sure we have questions.
Mr. Stramello, come on. My question is, this is the first time that I've heard you talk about a decline. And so if we're talking about now we have to have metrics that are in decline for a certain amount of time, that's a new ballgame, right? Because we've always been in the yellow since we started the school. We had a week where we had under 5, weeks under 5, we had a week of 0. So we can't decline anymore from there. So my question is, can there please be a more formalized document that articulates what the signal will be when we can increase the amount of students that are attending school?
Okay,
not what's being taken into consideration, but how the decisions are being made. Is it a non-starter unless the full medical community in our region agrees? Because we can't decline from 1, 2, or 0.
Okay, so is that 2 questions? I'm confused. Or is that 1 question, Mrs. Harmling?
It doesn't matter.
Okay. All right, Mr. Wilson, could you answer that question or questions?
Certainly, I will work with our head nurse, Ms. Bennett. I will also work with our director of NVHD, and I will create a document for the board view, and then I will share it to the community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All righty. I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Somebody, please. Go ahead.
I'll make a motion. This is Kristen Bruno, motion to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second?
Jim Garofalo seconds the motion.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion, we are adjourned. I will see everybody in a couple of minutes.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.